What happens when you put a young man who has spent his entire life living in the shadow of the most famous person who ever walked the face of the earth onto a live television stage in front of millions of people, and the host decides today is the day she is going to push every single button he has ever tried to keep hidden from the world? What happens when the smiles stop feeling genuine, when the questions stop feeling friendly, and when a man who has been quiet, patient, and composed for years finally decides that he has had enough? That is exactly what went down on the Kelly Clarkson show, and by the time this interview was over, nobody in that studio, nobody watching at home, and nobody on that production team was left feeling comfortable. This is the moment Jaafar Jackson stopped playing the game. Before we get into it, if you are new here, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below because we want to know what you think about what went down. Now let us get into this. The show opened the way it always does. The band was loud, the audience was warm, and Kelly Clarkson walked out with that energy she carries everywhere she goes, the kind that makes you feel like whatever is about to happen is going to be a good time. She welcomed the audience, made a couple of jokes, and then she said his name, Jaafar Jackson. The audience responded the way audiences always respond to that name. There was a particular kind of electricity in it, something that went beyond just recognizing a guest. That name carries weight that very few names in the history of entertainment can match, and everybody in that room felt it. Jaafar walked out, and the reception was genuine. People were on their feet. He smiled. He waved. He moved through it with a kind of grace that suggested he had done this before, that he knew how to carry himself in a room that was reacting to him before he had even said a single word. He sat down across from Kelly, and for a moment, just a moment, everything looked like it was going to be a perfectly normal celebrity interview on a perfectly normal afternoon talk show. Kelly leaned in and said, "Okay, first of all, can we just acknowledge the fact that you are absolutely stunning? Like, the resemblance is, honestly, it is a lot. I was watching you walk out and I had a moment." Jaafar smiled. It was a smile that had clearly been practiced, not in a dishonest way, but in the way that anyone who has been in the public eye from birth learns to construct a smile that gives nothing away. He said, "Thank you. I appreciate that." Kelly said, "I mean it genuinely. It is remarkable. And I think that is part of what makes you such a fascinating person to have here today, because you are your own artist, you are doing your own thing, but there is no ignoring where you come from. And I think that is actually something beautiful. Do you feel that way?" Jaafar paused for just a beat. Not long enough for anyone to call it a red flag, but long enough for anyone paying close attention to notice that he was choosing his words deliberately. He said, "I think I've made peace with the fact that people are always going to see me through that lens first, and that is okay. I cannot change what my last name is. I cannot change who my father was. But what I can do is put out music that speaks for itself, and I think that is what I am focused on right now." Kelly nodded enthusiastically and said, "Absolutely, and the music is incredible. We are going to talk about that. But I do want to stay here for a second because I think the audience deserves to understand what it is actually like. Like, growing up as Jaafar Jackson, growing up in that house, around that legacy. What does that actually do to a kid? What does that do to you?" And there it was. The first moment where the interview shifted. Just slightly, just enough. Because the question sounded like curiosity, it was framed in warmth. Kelly's voice had that sincerity that she does very well. But embedded in that question was an assumption. An assumption that growing up the way Jaafar grew up was something that needed to be examined, unpacked, and explained for the comfort of an audience that had already made up its mind about what the answer probably was. Jaafar said, "It makes you who you are. Any family, any household, shapes you. Mine just happened to be in the public eye. But I think the honest answer is that when you are a kid, you do not fully understand the scale of what your family represents to the outside world. You are just living your life. You are just a kid. And then you start to realize, slowly, that people have feelings about your family that are very strong and very complicated. And sometimes those feelings have very little to do with who your family actually is." Kelly tilted her head slightly and said, "That is such an interesting way to put it. When you say complicated feelings, what do you mean by that? Because I think there are a lot of people who feel like they know your family, who feel like they have a relationship with your family's story, even though they have obviously never met you personally." Jaafar said, "Right, and that is the thing that takes the longest to understand. People feel like they know things. They feel like they have done the research, or they watched a documentary, or they read something online, and now they know the full picture. And the reality is that no one on the outside ever has the full picture of anyone's family. That is just not how life works." The audience applauded. Genuinely. Because what he said was reasonable, it was measured, and it was true. But Kelly did not let it land and move on. She leaned forward a little more and said, "And I respect that completely. I do. But I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your family's story is not just a family story. It is a story that affected a lot of people, that touched a lot of people in different ways. And I guess what I am asking is, do you think about that? Do you think about the full weight of the legacy, all of it, not just the music?" The room got a little quieter. Not silent, not dramatically so, but the energy shifted in the way that energy shifts when people collectively sense that something is happening that is slightly outside the usual boundaries of daytime television. Jaafar looked at Kelly for a moment. He did not look angry yet. He looked like a man who was doing a very careful calculation. He said, "Kelly, I think I know what you are gesturing toward. And I want to be respectful about this because I genuinely believe you are coming from a good place. But I also need to be honest. I have been in a lot of interviews. I have sat across from a lot of people. And there is a version of this conversation that I have had more times than I can count, where someone starts by talking about my music. And slowly, very slowly, the conversation becomes about something else entirely. And I am always expected to just go along with it, to sit here and be gracious about it. And I have done that. For a long time, I have done that," Kelly said. "And I hear you, I do, but Jaafar said, "I am not finished." And the room went very, very still. He said, "I came here today to talk about my music. I came here because I have been working on something that I am genuinely proud of, that I built from the ground up, that has nothing to do with my last name except for the fact that music is in my blood and I cannot help that. And I would love for this to be a conversation about that. Because I think I deserve that conversation. I think my work deserves that conversation." Kelly, to her credit, did not immediately backpedal. She held the moment. She said, "You are absolutely right, and I want to have that conversation. I do. But Jaafar, and I am going to be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty. I think the reason people connect with you so deeply, the reason this audience is so excited to have you here, is because of the full picture. And I think sometimes running from that picture does not serve you." Jaafar looked at her, and this time the look was different. He said, "Who said anything about running? Who said anything about running?" Those 4 words landed differently than anything else Jaafar had said up to that point, because up until that moment, he had been composed. He had been measured. He had been the version of himself that he clearly walked into that studio intending to be. But something in Kelly's last statement had shifted something in him, and the audience could feel it. and Kelly could feel it. And the cameras were still rolling, and nobody was quite sure where this was about to go. Kelly held her smile, but it was working harder now. She said, "I did not mean it like that. I genuinely did not. I just think that your story, your whole story, is compelling. And I think audiences respond to authenticity. That is all I'm saying." Jaafar said, "Right, authenticity, okay?" He nodded slowly. "So let me be authentic then, because I think that is actually a fair request. You want authentic? Here it is. I have spent my entire life watching people decide what my family's story is. People who were not there. People who did not know my father the way I knew him. People who consumed a narrative that was handed to them and then treated that narrative like it was gospel. And every single time I sit down for an interview, I can feel the pull toward that narrative. I can feel the interviewer waiting for me to crack the door open so they can push it all the way through. And I am sitting here right now, on your show, feeling that exact same pull. And I am tired of pretending I do not feel it." The audience was very quiet now. Not uncomfortable quiet, more like the quiet of people who are genuinely listening because they understand that something real is being said. Kelly said, "I hear that, and I want you to know that I have the utmost respect for you and for your family." "That is not what this is," Jaafar said. "Then what is it, Kelly? Because from where I am sitting, we started this conversation talking about my music, and within 5 minutes we were talking about legacy and weight and all of it. And I just want to understand, genuinely, what is the goal of this conversation? What do you want me to say?" Kelly paused. It was a real pause, not a performer's pause. She said, "I want you to say whatever is true for you. That is all I have ever wanted from any guest on this show." Jaafar said, "Okay, then here is what is true for me. My father was a human being. He was not a symbol. He was not an icon when we were in the same room together. He was my father, and the world took him, and they made him into this enormous thing, and they argued over him, and they pulled him in every direction. And they did not stop doing that even after he was gone. And I grew up in the middle of all of that. And somehow, I am supposed to sit here and give you a clean, television-friendly answer about what that was like. And I cannot do that. I refuse to do that. Because it was not clean. It was not television-friendly. It was complicated, and it was painful, and it was also full of love, real love. And none of those things fit into the kind of soundbite that makes for good daytime television." Kelly said, softly, "I think that was the most honest thing anyone has said on this stage in a long time." And for a moment, just a brief moment, it seemed like the tension might release, like they had found solid ground and could now move forward together. The audience responded warmly. A few people clapped. Jaafar exhaled slightly, but then Kelly said, "Can I ask you something, though? And I want you to know that I am asking this because I think you are strong enough to handle it, and because I think the people who love you, and there are so many people who love you, deserve to hear your voice on this." Jaafar looked at her carefully. He said, "Go ahead." Kelly said, "There are people, a lot of people, who carry pain that they connect to your family's story. Not to you personally, but to the broader story. And I guess what I want to ask is, do you feel any— I do not know how to word this exactly. Do you feel any sense of responsibility toward those people? Toward that pain?" And there it was. The question underneath all the other questions. The one that the entire interview had been quietly building toward from the moment Jaafar sat down. And everyone in that room knew it. And Jaafar knew it most of all. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that it almost felt like he was not going to answer. Then he said, "Kelly, I need you to understand something, and I need the audience to understand it too. What you just asked me, the way you just framed that, You are asking me to take responsibility for pain that was manufactured largely by people who had a financial interest in manufacturing it. You are asking me to sit here and validate a narrative that my family has fought against, that has been investigated, that has been through legal processes, and come out the other side and act as though the outcome of all of that does not matter, as though the truth of it does not matter. And I will not do that. Kelly said, I am not asking you to validate anything. I am asking about empathy. Jaafar said, No, you are not. Because empathy goes in both directions. And no one ever asks about empathy for my family. No one ever sits across from me and asks, how did it feel to watch your father be destroyed in the press? How did it feel to grow up watching people celebrate content that was designed to tear your family apart? Where is the empathy in that conversation? Because I have never once been asked that question. Not once. And yet, here you are asking me to perform empathy for a narrative that I fundamentally believe is not the full truth. That is not a fair ask, Kelly. That is not fair. The audience shifted. You could hear it. Not boos, not cheers, just a collective physical reaction to the weight of what was being said. Kelly straightened slightly. She said, I want to be clear that I am not trying to ambush you. That has never been my intention. Jaafar said, I know it has not. I actually believe that. But I also think that good intentions do not automatically produce fair questions. And I think you came into this interview with a framework already in place for who I am and what I represent, and you have been trying to get me to step into that framework from the moment I sat down, and I am not going to do it. Not today. Not on this show. Not anymore, Kelly said. Then tell me who you are, outside of the framework. I genuinely want to know. Jaafar looked at her, and something changed in his face. Not softened exactly, but shifted, like a man who had just fought his way through something and was now standing on the other side of it. He said, I am someone who makes music because it is the only language I have ever fully trusted. I am someone who has watched the people I love be reduced to headlines, and I have refused to let that happen to me. I am someone who walked into this building today wanting to have a real conversation, a real one. Not a performance of a conversation. And I'm still sitting here because I hope that there is still a chance for that. Kelly said, There is. I promise you there is. Jaafar said, Then ask me about the music, Kelly. Ask me about what I actually came here to talk about. Because I have things to say. Real things. Things that matter to me. And I would really like the chance to say them. There was a pause, and then Kelly nodded, and something in the room breathed out. She said, Tell me about the music. And Jaafar leaned back, just slightly, and for the first time since he sat down, the tension in his jaw was gone. He said, Finally. The audience laughed, genuinely, and for a moment the whole thing felt like it might actually turn into something good. Like two people who had just been through something difficult together and had come out the other side, still willing to talk. Kelly smiled, and this time the smile did not have to work as hard. She said, Okay, so, the sound. Because when I first heard it, I was genuinely surprised. Tell me what you were going for. Jaafar said, I was going for something that felt like me. Not my father, not my family, not anyone else. Just me. And the thing about growing up around music the way I did is that you absorb everything. Every sound, every genre, every approach. It all goes in and it lives in you. And when I started making my own music, I had to make a conscious decision to stop filtering it through what I thought people expected from someone with my name, and just let it be what it actually was. Kelly said, And what was it, actually? Jaafar said, Honest. Just honest, Kelly said. I love that. And I think you can hear it. I think when you listen to what you have been putting out, You can hear someone who is not trying to be anything other than exactly what they are. Jaafar said, "That is all I have ever wanted anyone to hear." And the room was warm again, genuinely warm, and it felt, for a moment, like the hardest part of this interview was behind them, like they had both earned this easier air between them, like Jaafar had finally gotten the conversation he came for. But Kelly was not done. She picked up a card from the table beside her, glanced at it briefly, and then looked back at Jaafar with an expression that was careful and considered, and she said, "I want to come back to something, just for a moment, because I think we would be doing a disservice to not address it fully." And just like that, the air in the room changed again. Jaafar looked at the card, then he looked at Kelly, and something behind his eyes went very, very still. He said, "What is on that card, Kelly? What is on that card, Kelly?" He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. The question was quiet and precise, and it landed in the studio like something dropped from a very great height, because the way he said it told you everything. It told you that he already knew, at least in part, what was on that card. It told you that some part of him had been waiting for this moment since before he even walked through the door. Kelly set the card down on the table. She said, "There is a documentary. You know the one I am referring to. And I think, given everything we have been talking about today, it would feel incomplete to not give you the space to speak to it directly, on your own terms." Jaafar said, "You just told me to talk about the music. You just sat there and told me you wanted to give me the chance to say what I actually came here to say. And then you picked up a card." Kelly said, "I know, but Jaafar, this is the conversation that the world is having, and I think you are one of the only people with the standing to speak to it the way it deserves." Jaafar said, "The standing, right." He let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. "You know what standing I actually have? The standing of someone who lost his father, not a spokesperson, not a representative, not someone who owes the public an explanation for something he had no part in. I am a son who lost his father and who has been asked over and over again to perform grief and accountability for an audience that has already decided what they believe." Kelly said, "And I think that perspective, the perspective of the son, is exactly what is missing from this conversation publicly." Jaafar said, "Missing from it. My family has spoken, clearly and consistently. The problem is not that the perspective is missing. The problem is that people do not want to hear it, because it does not fit the story they have already committed to. So what exactly is this for? Who is this actually helping?" Kelly said, "It is helping you. I think carrying this quietly takes a toll. I think there is freedom in saying it out loud." And that was the moment. That was the precise moment where Jaafar Jackson, who had been patient and deliberate for the entire duration of this interview, reached the end of what he was willing to absorb. He said, "Do not do that. Do not tell me what is good for me. Do not frame pushing me into the most painful conversation of my life as though it is some kind of gift you are giving me. You have a show to run, you have an audience that came expecting something, and you are trying to deliver it. I understand that, but do not dress it up as therapy, because that is insulting." The audience was completely silent now, not the comfortable silence of people watching something entertaining, the silence of people witnessing something they were not prepared for. Kelly said, "I am sorry if it came across that way. That was genuinely not my intention." Jaafar said, "Your intentions are not the issue. I have said that already. The issue is the pattern. I walked in here today as an artist, with music, with a body of work I built with my own hands over years, and this conversation could not get through a single segment without pulling everything back to a narrative that has been used to define and diminish my family for years. And I am sitting here asking myself why I keep agreeing to these things. Because every single time I think it is going to be different, and every single time I end up right back here. He leaned forward and said, "Did you plan to ask me about the documentary before I walked in today? Was that always part of the plan?" Kelly held the silence for a moment that was its own kind of answer. Then she said quietly, "It was on the list of topics." "Yes." Jaafar nodded slowly. He said, "Thank you for being honest, because it confirms something I needed confirmed today. No matter how carefully I choose where I show up, no matter how clearly I communicate what I am here to talk about, there is always a list. There's always a card on the table. And I have been tolerating that for too long," he said. "My father was innocent. I believe that with everything I am. And I know people hear that and think, I am just a loyal son protecting a legacy. Maybe I am biased. Every child is biased toward their parent. But I was there. I knew the man. And the man I knew was not the man in those documentaries. And I will say that for the rest of my life, if I have to, on every stage, in every interview, to every camera, because the alternative is silence, and silence, for me, is not an option anymore." The audience began to applaud, not the polite, prompted applause of a talk show, the kind that builds because it is genuine, because people are responding to something they felt rather than something they were cued to feel. When it quieted, Kelly said, "I think that took real courage." Jaafar said, "It is not courage. It is just honesty. And it should not have taken a heated interview on a talk show for me to say clearly what I have believed my entire life." He paused. "Ask me something about the music." Kelly smiled, and this time it was the realest smile she had produced in the entire hour. She said, "What do you want people to feel when they listen to your album?" Jaafar said, without hesitating, "I want them to feel like somebody told them the truth." And that was it. That one sentence was what the whole interview had been building toward. Not the confrontation, not the card on the table, but that. A young man, on a stage in front of millions, fighting for the right to be heard on his own terms. And in the very last moment, saying the thing the whole conversation had been circling without ever quite reaching. Somebody told them the truth. He meant the music, but he also meant today. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Kelly Clarkson went too far pushing those questions? Or did Jaafar need to be challenged the way he was today? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe if you are not already, because this is the kind of conversation we have every single week.